Okay, this is my sister Kelsey, and I'm going to be interviewing her today. What do you do for a living?
I'm an assistant teacher at a preschool.
And what ages are the children that you work with?
My ages are 4 and 5, but sometimes 3-year-olds come in my room at the end of the day.
Okay, and have you ever noticed any sounds that your students have trouble pronouncing?
Most of my students have trouble pronouncing the R's, so instead of saying cars, they say cause.
Okay. And what about any like speech impediments such as stuttering?
Half of my students have a stuttering problem.
And do you notice this happens like when they get like frustrated or anything? Do they tend to stutter more when they get frustrated?
They stutter when they have a lot to tell me. Like if they want to tell me a story, I realize that happens most frequently.
Okay, it's like too much
Yeah.
at one time almost. Okay, and do you have any students that are bilingual?
I have a student, Bella. She is 3 years old, and she will start a sentence in English and then finish it in Spanish.
Okay. And her mom speaks Spanish?
Yes.
Okay. And does her mom speak mostly Spanish to her or English? Do you know?
I asked her mother about it, and she said they only speak Spanish at home.
Okay. And then when she comes to school, it's
Everyone
strictly
speaks English.
Okay.
Yep.
And does that affect the way they pronounce certain sounds or communicate with you and other students? Like, is it difficult to understand her sometimes?
It's definitely difficult to understand her because I don't speak Spanish, and no one there knows how to speak Spanish. So it definitely can get difficult.
Definitely. Okay, so do your students respond differently when you use different tones? Like if you raise your voice or speak nicely, do they react in different ways?
When I speak in a lower tone, I get on their level, and they definitely react to that, and they understand, like, I'm not meaning any harm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you find it difficult when communicating with parents?
It's hard to deal with parents when they want their kid to be right when their kid maybe is behaving poorly.
Okay. And I know communicating with children can be difficult. Do you have any tips for those who are interested in working with children?
My tip is for let the kid talk. The kid may be 4 or 5, but they're still a person. So let them talk. They still have a mind.
Mm-hmm. And before you mentioned that, like when you do have an issue with a child, you have this thing where you give them 2 options. Can you just explain that more?
When a kid is misbehaving, I put them in, it's called a thinking chair. They think about what they have done, but they can sit there or they can go to the office. So I give them 2 choices, and if they don't want to do any of those choices, they get to leave the classroom.
Okay, and that's good because it like lets them think for themselves almost,
yes.
Right? And are there any words that you notice your students say a lot?
My students say a lot to each other is stop and you're so mean.
Okay, and do they talk to each other in a certain way? Like, is it more friendly? Is it more mean?
My students can be very loving to each other, but most times they talk to each other in a very rude manner because I'm guessing in other classes, other teachers didn't correct them for the behavior. Mm-hmm. And now I'm correcting them, so now it's going to be a challenge for them because they have to change it.
Yeah. And how do you work on that?
Every time they say it, well, I have a kindness jar. So every time they're kind, they put it in the jar. And if they say something that is not kind to their friend, I take a puffball out of the jar.
Okay. And then what happens when the jar is all the way filled?
When the jar is all the way full, we have a class party.
That's fun. And have you ever had to like completely empty the jar?
Yes. Potty words are very common in my class. And if I warn them 5 times about a potty word in one day, I empty the whole entire jar.
Okay. And do you think this like encourages them to use nice words?
Yes, I noticed they'll say a potty word, and then I'll look at them and they will apologize for their actions.
Okay. And do you do any activities with the children that can improve their vocabulary?
I make them trace the alphabet,
Okay.
and then when they're done, I make them pronounce their letters. Like for B, B, like I'll make them do all of that, and then once they do it, I give them a cookie to reward them.
Okay. And do you do any activities that can improve the way that the kids can communicate with each other?
I separate the kids as teams, and then I put puzzles out so they can work with one-on-one or with the teams to build the puzzle.
Okay, so it's kind of like group work, so it's like forcing them to communicate with each other almost. Very good. Okay, so I know that I too want to go into a career working with kids. So what is the hardest part about your job and working with children?
Hardest part about my job is working with stubborn children.
Okay, and why is that hard? Is it hard to communicate with them?
Yeah, it's hard to communicate with them and trying to get on their level when they are not wanting it.
Okay. And do you find that a lot of children just don't want to listen to you?
Yes, some kids are very set in their own way.
Okay. And what do you do in order for them to listen to you better?
I sit them down and I tell them it's okay, because I feel like once I sit them down, they're like, oh my goodness, I'm in timeout. So I sit them down and tell them it's okay. Then I make them look at me in the eyes and I tell them what's going to happen.
Okay. And what's the most rewarding part of your job?
Most rewarding part is knowing half the kids in my class struggle at home and having them come to school, and it's like the best feeling for them.
Okay. So it makes you happy because you can make their day better?
Yes.
And do you find your job difficult at all?
I wouldn't say of course my job is difficult dealing with children, but it's a blessing.
And why do you think it's difficult? Is it ever like stressful because of, kids are cranky, or, they won't go down for a nap, or?
It's definitely stressful when I have so many kids in my class at once. Sometimes I'll have about 13 kids, different ages, and they're just with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that can definitely be difficult.
Yeah. And how do you go about your days with the kids at school? Like, is there any sort of organization?
When I make my lesson plans for them, every day I include a craft, a learning activity, and a gross motor activity. That means gross motor, they're using their hands, they're getting up, they're being active.
Okay. And do you also have like a planner where you plan what lessons you're going to do in the future?
Yes, I have a planner and I plan the whole entire month. So the first of the month I'll plan that whole entire month.
Okay. And where do you get like all of your ideas from? Like, do you borrow them from other teachers? Do you make something up on your own?
Most of them I borrow from Pinterest, or I did intern at a preschool for a year, so that teacher gives me some of her ideas.
All right, and I just want to wrap this up by asking like some of your future goals. Like, do you plan on staying at this school and working with these children for a long time after this?
Right now I'm just a assistant preschool teacher, so that means I just do the activity part of it, not the actual learning part.
Okay.
So later on I want to be a head preschool teacher, or I'm thinking about being a special education teacher, because I do have some few students in my class that are special ed and I love working with them.
Okay. And where do you plan on going to college when you're finished with OCC?
When I'm finished with OCC, I will be attending Stockton for, depends what career path I take. If it's special education, I'm going to be going there for 4 years. If I'm doing just a preschool teacher, I'm going to be transferring to Stockton for 2 years.
Very nice. All right, thank you.